we get started real quick, I'm Dorothy Chang. I'm a co-founder of Links Collective. That's my co-founder and partner in the back, Andrew Chang. At Links Collective, we are just trying to support founders. After 20 years working in tech as founders, investors, and operators, we're just now trying to help all of you to be successful by creating events like these and opportunities for you to learn, make meaningful connections, and get meaningful knowledge. And we do workshops and speaker series and coaching and peer group circles, all kinds of fun stuff. And our members get exclusive and priority access to all of it. So check it out. Heads up, we will take questions from the audience starting around 6:30 or so. So if you have things that you want to ask, you'll be able to do it then. And today we're kicking off our Inside VC series with Jared Hecht. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so Jared, you have been a founder. You're now an investor. We're going to dig into all of it. So let's start from the beginning. You got your start in startups working at Tumblr before you founded your own things. What learnings did you take from your experience at Tumblr that helped you once you became a founder?
Good question. I started my career at Tumblr. So I graduated from college and then joined Tumblr, which is a USB-backed startup here in New York City. And I joined as like the 7th or 8th employee. And I'd say the biggest learning I had from that experience was a short-lived project that was there for approximately a year. Was probably that I was unemployed. It was extraordinarily lucky thing for me to have that experience because in many ways I had a business journey to the startup. I really didn't know about startups. I didn't know about this thing seeing jobs because the president I really just wanted somebody to help him out. So t-shirts to influencers on the platform, pretty much all the things that he didn't want to do. But I thought it was going to be a really neat opportunity. And what I did know is that one day I wanted to start my own company, and that I kind of had this intuition that the best way to do that was to go actually see how companies looked, felt, operated, particularly at the early stages. I didn't know much about venture-backed startups at that point in time either. So it was just this cool time. Also, it was a really cool time in New York City because tech startups weren't really a thing. They were just beginning to emerge. It wasn't like a cool or conventional career path to say, hey, I'm not going to go do management consulting or finance. It was a pretty contrarian thing at that point in time. So that was a really wonderful learning experience because you're kind of just like thrown into this thing that is like the inception of this startup movement here in New York City. But my big takeaway from that whole experience was, as much as I loved kind of learning and having all this exposure to all these things that were happening, both within Tumblr and outside Tumblr, was that I was so eager to kind of try it on my own. And what I wanted to be able to do was to make decisions. And as a very naive 22-year-old, I thought that I was entitled to the opportunity to make those decisions, and I wasn't. In retrospect, not at all. But that experience taught me that I got really frustrated in environments where I couldn't be somewhat responsible for outcomes and be a decision maker. Yeah.
Very precocious as a 22, 23-year-old to realize that.
Yeah, or you could say I was kind of just like a little prick.
I thought of you as precocious at the time. So you went from there to start GroupMe. What a time that was, and how fun. And after the GroupMe experience, Fundera. So those are two very different companies.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about how you built conviction in the ideas for each of them, and how did you find, or when did you feel like you found product market fit?
Sure. So with regards to conviction, I knew I wanted to start my own company when I was at Tumblr. I was in the midst of playing around with a variety of different ideas. I had hired this designer on the side who was working at College Humor at that point in time to help me spin up this new web application, which we called Rec.io, which was like a recommendation engine to find and share recommendations with people you know and trust, mainly of like restaurants and bars in New York City. So if you ever grew up in New York City as a 22-year-old or 23-year-old in your early 20s, everyone has this idea of like, oh, how do I discover cool restaurants and discover cool bars? And I think it's kind of like a rite of passage as an entrepreneur to have that idea. Has anybody else had that idea in this room? Yeah. Okay. So there we go. 5%, 10% of this room. It's a thing. I was like chomping at the bit, like I was ready to start a thing. And so part of my conviction around GroupMe was I was just mentally primed and there. Like, let's go build the thing and jump into the deep end. I'm ready. I've prepped, for all of my life, AKA like the past 8 months. And therefore I'm well equipped to go tackle this. GroupMe came around because actually both these companies came around because of problems that family members of mine were experiencing. The impetus for GroupMe was that me and my wife were planning to go to a music festival out in Colorado with a group of our friends, and we were all coordinating over an email chain. And my wife, Carrie, said, this is silly. Why can't we just take this email chain and do it over text messaging? Because when we get to this event, we're not on email anymore. We're all texting each other trying to figure out where we are. And why can't we do reply all SMS? And I didn't know the answer to that question. So I called up one of my best friends, this guy, Steve Mortosi, who's now a 2-time USV founder and was my co-founder for GroupMe, and asked him, why can't we do reply all SMS? And he said,
now we have to, what year was this?
Oh God, this was
2009, 2010.
Yeah.
There wasn't group messaging back then.
Yeah, iMessage didn't exist. Like people were using BBM, if anybody had a BlackBerry. And like WhatsApp, I think was an iPhone app at that point in time, but it was no one used it in the US at that. It was really used kind of like as a BBM, but abroad. And so the market was like very nascent. And what I'm saying might sound ridiculous today, but like you couldn't send a group text. That was not a thing. All SMS was 1-to-1. There was no group messaging, period, end of story. And that seems preposterous. So I asked Steve that question, like, why can't we do this? And he said, let me think about it. And he said, well, let's go try and do this. So we entered the very first TechCrunch Disrupt Hackathon, which happened to be that weekend. So like all of this is kind of just like fate. And we built a working prototype. We showed up and Twilio was there, and Twilio had this booth, and no one was using Twilio for anything. And I was kind of remotely familiar with Twilio because they came and pitched Tumblr on like, hey, maybe you can build a cool telephony application. We don't know what that would look like, but maybe you could think about what that would look like, and we didn't. But then they were there, and we were like, oh, we could maybe use you to power group texting. And they had just like launched this new SMS feature at that point in time. Again, kind of like fate and stars aligning. So we built a working prototype where you could create a group of friends all over SMS. All of that group was assigned a unique phone number, like the phone number that you have. You would text the group and it would go to everybody else in the group. They would text that phone number and it would go to everybody else in the group. And that was the beginning of GroupMe. And within 24 hours, we had a couple groups spun up. And the next day, we noticed a couple other groups got spun up because some of the people that we had added to those groups were beginning to create their own groups. And the day after that, I told my boss at Tumblr that I was going to go leave and do a startup. And that was going to be GroupMe. And he was kind enough to be the first person to volunteer to cut a check into the company as well. So that was a roughly 48-hour period of developing conviction to do the thing. But I think it was so compressed because I was mentally there. I knew I wanted to start a company.
So this isn't the normal timeline that
maybe it is. I don't know what normal is anymore. I think everyone kind of has their own unique story and their own set of circumstances. And sometimes it's because there's a problem that they're obsessive about and it's deeply personal, or it's a problem that a family member has experienced. Other times it's because they really just know a space really well. And they're like, this is silly that it doesn't work better. And I think I have a keen and expert insight that I should go tackle. So it really varies. Maybe there's different types of normal, but Yeah, or I don't know, you're entrepreneurs, you're abnormal by definition.
When did you feel like you found product market fit?
That's a good question. Um, well, we always thought, by the way, I don't know if the term product market fit existed in 2010 too, which is interesting. Um, we we always thought that we should be growing faster than we were, and I think that's a sentiment that all founders share, no matter what. Um, part of me thinks that we found product market fit that very first day because we solved our problem. We went in there saying, hey, how do we build a thing that specifically does this? And it did the thing. And we built it for ourselves and we were the market. So maybe it was day one. I think where things really started humming was when we built our first mobile application. And we enabled people to actually send messages in a mobile app without using SMS. And that's when we really saw a rapid acceleration in growth. So perhaps like the initial thing was we're using it for ourselves, we have product market fit. And the second thing was, oh my God, the market's actually a lot bigger than we thought it was. Look at these mobile apps that are kind of proliferating all across the universe. We now have one of them and it's growing.
And it's still around.
Yeah, it's miraculously. I think it's like kind of like the Craigslist of messaging applications. It just refuses to go away. Like for north of a decade, I don't think there were any updates to the app. It just persisted and kind of entrenched itself in colleges across the country. Somehow 30 million people still use it every month. I don't understand.
30 million.
I don't understand.
Fundera, on the other hand, different story.
Totally different story. So the conviction to build Fundera, I knew I had another company in me. The GroupMe experience was a very short-lived one. We were an independent company for something like 13 to 15 months, and then we were acquired by Skype and Microsoft. So it wasn't like I had drained the tank of all the fuel. Like I felt like a piece of me felt like we just got really lucky. And I still feel that way. I think that with a lot of consumer applications, it can be somewhere between like, call it 80 to 90% luck and then 10 to 20% executing against that luck. It's kind of like you capture lightning in a bottle and it's really your job for all intents and purposes, just not to fuck it up and to nurture it and to ideally strengthen it over time. So there was a big piece of me that identified as an entrepreneur, but almost felt like a fraud. Felt like I lucked out. This was a fluke. And I wanted to prove to myself and to the world that I could actually do this and I could do it again. And that this actually was a real thing. So I had this drive to essentially be like, no, I am an entrepreneur. I can keep doing this. And part of me, for some masochistic reason, felt like the way I needed to prove that was to do something that was going to be like a real business on day one, aka generating revenue. And GroupMe was this application, and still is an application that does not generate any revenue. So I wanted to show that I could build a real business. And to me, that meant like doing things that involved learning how new functions worked. I wanted to figure out how to build a sales team. I wanted to figure out how to tackle different types of markets that I knew nothing about, which happened to be financial services. So I kind of had this chip on my shoulder where I wanted to go out and prove to the world that I could do it again. And that I really wanted to learn new things. And then the idea for Fundera came along because I had started angel investing. And I wanted to make an equity investment in my cousin's business who lives in Ohio. He's got a chain of restaurants called Fusion, which is like fast food, but sushi in Ohio, which has actually worked out well. And I wanted to invest in his company to help him open up a third location. And he said no, because he didn't want to be diluted. He and his father owned 100% of the business. And he asked for a loan instead. And I said, absolutely not, go to a bank. And he told me he went to 3 different banks and was rejected by every single one of them. And to me, that felt crazy because he had a real business that was profitable, generating revenue, had been around for 3 years, and he couldn't get a $300,000 loan to open up his third location. And I came from the world of consumer internet startups where you were able to raise tens of millions of dollars with approximately $0 in revenue. So something felt weird. So I started doing a bunch of research. and stumbled on this world of online lending, which had emerged in the consumer lending world with companies like Lending Club and Prosper, and was beginning to emerge in the small business world with companies like Funding Circle in the UK and On Deck and Cabbage, and banks that were beginning to think about how do they digitally distribute their products on the internet, and developed this hypothesis that small business owners would shop for financial solutions like loans and credit cards and bank accounts the same way that they shop for everything else, which is like on the internet through a marketplace, and decided to build exactly that. So the conviction came from really doing a bunch of research, seeing a real problem that a family member once again experienced, and being prepared once again with a totally new motivation.
When did you feel like you found product market fit with Fundera?
Very similar to the GroupMe experience. The first semblance of product market fit came when the thing just worked. We launched it quietly. We started testing driving traffic to the site through SEO and taking out some search marketing advertisements. And people would come, they would fill out an application, and then they would get offers of credit from some of the lenders that we began to sign up and work with in the marketplace. And it was really after the first loan got funded where I was like, oh my God, this works as intended. Now we paid like $8,000 to acquire that customer and made like $200. So economically it wasn't working, but in theory it conceivably could work one day. I felt like it really started working when we unlocked SEO as a channel. So one of the insights that we also had was that the way that small business owners went about applying for different types of credit products was they would go to their bank, and then they would get rejected most of the time. And then they would try to do some research on the internet, but the only place they could do research was at the bank's website who had just rejected them. Like literally when you typed in best business credit card or small business loan or business checking account, it was just Chase, Wells Fargo, US Bank. All banks who weren't providing like objective information or helping to educate small business owners. And we thought that we could build a trusted brand by just creating all this literature that was oriented around helping small business owners educate themselves and make great decisions confidently. And when we saw people, well, really when we kind of became the first organic search result for all those terms was when I really felt like we had product market fit. Yeah.
So we're kind of going through these stories really quickly because then we're going to, hear from Jared about how he's investing. There's so much more, I think, to learn from your experiences, but let's touch on the acquisitions of both of these startups that you started.
Yeah.
And what you learned from each of those experiences, which I imagine were contrasting from each other.
Yeah. I mean, there's like this cliche saying of it's better for companies to be bought and not sold. And that is definitely the case in my experience. With GroupMe, there's an argument that we sold the thing way too early, but we were young. We were co-founders here in New York City, and New York City hadn't really experienced any meaningful exit in like consumer internet or mobile consumer applications at that point in time. And we also had this insane scaling cost because we were still a lot of the messages that were being sent were done over SMS, and we were paying for every single text message. So we were burning like $750,000 a month just supporting our SMS infrastructure, which was just nuts. So we were in the process of, going bankrupt at some point in time over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. And Skype came along and made an offer that was really compelling. And we were like, yeah, we should do this. They're really interested in this company. This would be a life-changing event for the two of us. We would solve this issue of, are we going to go out of business because we can't afford these SMS costs anymore? And we have the opportunity to kind of run social and mobile at Skype, which is about to be Microsoft. And maybe we'll end up running social and mobile at Microsoft. And of course, that didn't happen, but that was kind of like the wide-eyed optimism that we were experiencing at that point in time. So that was a great process because like we were being courted in every way, and it feels good to be loved, and it feels good when people are like, oh, we want to do this with you and we think you're great, and they, their job is to effectively make you feel good, and you feel good. Now, Fundera was a very different experience. Fundera we had built a business to roughly, it was profitable, growing like 75% year over year and doing $30 million in annual revenue. And a couple months before COVID happened, We got an offer from a potential acquirer and we rejected it. And we were like, nope, we got this. And also my experience at GroupMe taught me that like maybe I sold too early, so we should keep going. And then COVID happened and every small business in the country shut down and all small business lending in the country stopped as well. And 80% of our revenue evaporated overnight. And we had to lay off a third of the company. And that was a really shitty experience. And miraculously, we got through it. We were able to kind of insert ourselves in the PPP program, which enabled us to facilitate like north of $1 billion in funding for tens of thousands of small business owners across the country. That felt really good and gave us purpose during a period of time where we were like, is this a viable thing anymore? And after that experience, I was really burnt out. Our leadership team was really burnt out. We had just spent the past 4 months kind of up 24/7, figuring out how we were going to keep the business alive. And I kind of had this honest moment with myself, which was, we're waiting for the market to recover. It's very unclear when small business lending and small businesses will actually rebound. Do I want to wait another 2 years, conceivably, for this thing to rebound and rebuild this business? And my answer to myself was no. I felt like there were other things I wanted to pursue and I didn't want to sign up for another 10 years. And I asked the same question to our leadership team. And everybody was very honest about it. And everybody's answer was no. Like, if we could go and get an offer similar to what we had just received, we would take that and we would find a home for the company. And we would stay and make sure that the company fulfilled its potential over X amount of time and then leave to our next acts. And I went back to the company that had made us an offer before and said, hey, is that offer still on the table? And they were like, eh. Ironically, they agreed to the same price. They just put a ton of structure on the deal where like roughly a third of the deal consideration was paid up front, and the remaining 2/3 would be an earnout contingent on us hitting some performance-based targets. And they were hedging that if the market didn't rebound, they didn't want to pay up for the company. And if it did rebound and we were able to grow again, they would happily pay up for it, which is a really smart thing for them to do. So they provided us that offer. And then I went and talked to 4 or 5 other strategic partners of ours that we had developed relationships with over the course of the past 5 years. And another one of them came back with an offer structured almost identically, just for a higher price. And we sold the company in a Nerdwallet. And fortunately, the market rebounded and somehow we grew the company from a $30 million revenue company to a $100 million revenue company over the next 2 years. So we got very, very lucky with just kind of these market forces and people kind of fed up with being locked down and the market began to rebound. But that was not a fun time in my life. The Skype experience was fun. I was like 23 years old or 24 years old and just kind of felt on top of the world. And like we were the hot mobile app. And that was really neat. It was a fun kind of once in a lifetime moment in time. The Fundera experience was just, how are we going to survive? We just spent 7 years building this thing. Can we get our investors their money back? Will everybody actually be able to kind of reap the fruits of their labor and all the hard work and effort they put into this thing over the course of the past 5, 7, 8 years? And there was a lot of, you're all building companies for the most part. Like, how this is. There's a lot of dark moments. And that was absolutely one of them. So they were polar opposite experiences.
What can founders learn from those experiences that you had, and how can, if we could optimize for everything, we would make probably the experience feel more like GroupMe, right? Than Fundera. We want to have fun and we want it to feel good. Yeah. Maybe part of it is, a B2C versus B2B business. Part of it is the markets. But what can we try to learn and apply from what you went through.
I mean, I think it's all kind of just a rite of passage. Like shit happens. There's good times, there's bad times. When you're building a company, there's definitely more bad times than there are good times, but you really only remember the good times. It's kind of like if you have kids, like your first 2, 3 years of having kids, like when you're in it, it's just like, oh my God, why did we do this? But then like you reflect back when they're like 4 or 5 and you're like, oh, I wish they were like 6 months old again when I wasn't sleeping at all and totally crazy. Like that's kind of what building the company is like. All these things in the rear view mirror just seem glorious. And it's like, those were the glory days. Those were the best times ever. That's when we grew and flourished as individuals and teammates and forged bonds. And it's just like, it's the stuff that like movies are made of. It's just iconic in every sense of the word. So I think the thing is, it's just like time passes. All these things pass. It's, I've come to really appreciate cliches. And like, it really is all about the journey. It is. At some point, you realize that these cliches are there for a reason. It's because they're all fucking true. So time passes, you get through it, and you'll only remember the things fondly.
Are all the cliches true? Is there something that you feel strongly about of all the, advice that people give founders or founders give founders that you feel differently about?
You asked me this question beforehand, and I should have prepped for it.
Or put another
No, I
way,
think the cliches are true. This shit is hard.
They're all just true.
Yeah, it's really hard. Like, the things we hear mostly from entrepreneurs, when as entrepreneurs, the things that we usually hear are like these incredible success stories and all of the amazing moments. And, this person grew from 0 to nothing overnight. And oh my God, look how successful that person is and crushing it and blah. That's not how it is. It's hard. It requires an inordinate amount of grit and just perseverance and dealing with all the hard shit. And I don't think there's any way around it. I don't think that there's any way to shortcut all of those difficult experiences. You just have to go through them all. The faster you can get through them all, well, I don't even think you can get through them faster because like you don't know what you're getting into. So I don't know. I think the cliches are real. I think it's really hard. And in many ways, it's one of the most rewarding things that you could possibly do. And I'm so grateful for the experience of having had done it.
Amazing. Okay, so now let's move on to your current role as an investor. You're a venture partner at USV. What does your role entail? What do you do?
Yeah, so I'm an investor here. I show up every day of the week and I meet with entrepreneurs and I meet with our team and we talk about how we're going to evolve our thesis. What are the things that we're seeing? What's really interesting to us? How do we think the world is going to unfold? What do we think are going to be important companies and why? And we make investments in entrepreneurs and we hope that they do an extraordinarily good job fulfilling their mission. And we're here to partner with them and help them along the way. So in a nutshell, that's what I do.
Tell us more.
Yeah.
What kind of startups are you looking at? Are you looking at specific industries, stages?
Sure. So USV is a generalist firm. So what that means is we are not sector or vertical specific. We invest across the board. I would say we have a proclivity for investing in consumer-facing things, but it's not exclusively consumer-facing things. We are also a thesis-driven firm. So while there might be some firms that focus on fintech or ed tech or climate tech, we're not focused in that regard. We're focused kind of horizontally. And the way we focus horizontally is by making sure that companies do fit our thesis. And that thesis has been evolving. We're now on the 4th iteration of it over the course of the past 2 decades. And the current construct is that we invest at the edge of large markets that are being transformed by some combination of technological and societal pressure. And if you've been following the USV theses over the course of the past 2 decades, that will make perfect sense. If you have not been following it over the course of the past 2 decades, I'll unpack that a little bit for you. When we talk about investing at the edge of large markets, really what that means is we are looking for companies that can do things without permission. They're not relying on gatekeepers. They're not, whether those are regulatory gatekeepers or, large bureaucratic companies to figure out how they're going to distribute their product and get it in the hands of their end customers. We are looking for people who can do things without permission. They can ship things and immediately get it into the hands of their customers and get feedback. When we talk about markets that are undergoing transformation because of technological and societal pressures, by that we mean, pressure that might exist that's technological in nature. You could think about something like artificial intelligence and how that is transforming industries across the board. On a more narrow basis, you could say things like at-home diagnostics in healthcare, the ability to continuously track glucose in your body or other biomarkers or draw blood at home would be an example of some type of new technology that might transform a market. A societal pressure might exist when a group of people are totally fed up with the way an industry works. I'll use healthcare again as an example. There's a zeitgeisty moment in time right now where people are beginning to say, I'm going to be accountable for my own well-being. I'm going to be accountable for my own health outcomes because I don't trust the existing healthcare system. All the inherent incentives there are not really oriented around keeping me healthy. They're really oriented around maximizing profits, which means making sure I'm unhealthy and unwell. And that type of conflicting incentive ultimately trickles down to a population that says, fuck this, we're doing this ourselves. And that's the kind of societal pressure that we look for. You could see the exact same thing in climate. A meaningful percentage of the population is saying the climate crisis is an existential crisis and we need to do something about it. And consumers, governments, companies, you name it, are now saying we need to be accountable for the outcome here. And they're taking control of it and they're saying we're going to make a change. So it's the confluence of all those factors that we look for. And that's really what the thesis means. So when you see a USV company, while that company might be a climate tech company or might be a fintech company or might be a Web3 company or it might be something in education, they all have a common theme. You should be able to kind of feel it. And it feels like a USV company. And that's something that I think is really special about this place. So I invest across the board in all these different industries, so long as it fits nicely within our thesis.
So it's an interesting time in the markets now. The last year hasn't looked like the previous 2 years, right? Things maybe it's harder for VCs to raise funds. It's harder for, therefore, founders to raise from VCs. But AI is completely exploding. So what do you see as being kind of the most interesting things that are happening right now? Where are things going overall?
Yeah, I like weird, fringy things. By design, this firm manages small funds. We're kind of living in this day and age where the venture capital ecosystem has changed a lot. You got a lot of firms that have raised billions and billions of dollars, and you have other funds that have remained small. And USV has remained small by design. And what that means is, when we invest in companies, we primarily invest at Series A or a seed. The average size check that we're writing into a Series A company, call it, hovers somewhere between $5 to $7 million. So that means we're not going out there and leading $30 million Series A's. And a lot of the $30 million Series A's that are being done are usually they're in hot companies. So what that means is we're not really chasing after the hottest companies that are optimizing for raising the most amount of money at the highest valuation. We're looking for things at the edge. We're looking for things that kind of feel a little bit off, and we think that's a really, really good thing. We actually think that's a defining characteristic of the types of investments that we make. I've been an LP in USV for the past 12 years or so. So I've been an investor in the funds. And whenever I received updates from the firm, the updates are remarkably comprehensive and transparent. It's something that it just blows my mind how open the firm has been. Every time a fund begins to get deployed as an LP, things always kind of looked a little bit weird to me. I was like, what's going on? What's going on with this firm? How are they talking about companies? How are they thinking about the world? And then 3 or 4 years later, everything would click and it'd be like, aha, that weirdness felt weird because it was at the edge. It was on the very periphery of these large markets. And then 3 years pass, 5 years pass, 7 years pass, 10 years pass. All of a sudden, it's at the epicenter of that market. And that's a really, really cool thing to witness over time. So I like those weird, fringy things that we think could ultimately migrate from the outside of these large markets and become the pillar of those large markets over time. That's pretty abstract, but maybe you get the point.
Well, maybe you can make it real.
Yeah.
With an example.
Yeah, sure. So let's look at, there's a really interesting in healthcare. I'll kind of pull on this healthcare thread a little bit more, that essentially recruits people who are patient scientists who want to give their blood on a consistent basis to contribute to a database such that people who are developing novel therapeutics to cure disease can have access to effectively what is a large blood bank and series of biomarkers to build these types of therapeutics and save more lives. So you could look at this as an example of there's a group of people, a network of people who are very active on the internet, talking about their ailments, talking about the chronic conditions that they suffer from, who are saying, hey, how do we accelerate the pace at which these diseases are being cured? And how do we take action into our own hands? And the way in which they envision taking action is by contributing their own biology, contributing their own data, such that people can do research faster, make progress faster, have access to more broader swaths of the population quicker, and begin to develop science and drugs and therapies around how to cure those diseases. So I think this is like a quintessential example of a network of people who are kind of operating at the fringe and are saying weird things like, hey, I'm happy to, contribute blood work for myself every week at home and then mail these samples back to this company, which then compiles all this data and provides access to researchers and pharmaceutical companies who want to develop novel therapeutics to cure disease. That's a really interesting force of people who are like, we're going to progress medicine faster and we're going to do that in a patient and consumer powered way. I kind of love that concept. Whether it works or not, I have no idea, but conceptually that's really neat.
So we'll find out in 3 or 4 years if it feels normal.
Yeah, exactly.
I think a good example actually is Foursquare. When it first came out, like my reaction was like, why would I ever want to share my location with everybody?
Yeah, you could think of like Facebook was the same way. Why would I ever want to publish a photo of myself on the internet? It's a preposterous idea.
Or Uber, like why would I get in some random person's car? Airbnb.
Exactly.
And they all became normal.
Yeah. I think that was actually one of the reasons initially why USB might have passed on Airbnb, which was I can't see myself sleeping on a stranger's couch. And lo and behold, 15 years later, still not sleeping on strangers' couches, but at least in their spare bedroom.
Which is even weirder, honestly.
Maybe, who knows?
Okay, so what advice do you have for founders who are currently raising money?
Okay. Practice storytelling. It's, now that I'm an investor, one of the things I'm shocked by is, maybe this is too much of a generalization. I don't think founders practice storytelling enough. Like as founders, the superpower you need to hone is your ability to craft a message to the world. Like you have to recruit people and convince people to quit their jobs and come work with you so that you can achieve whatever mission and vision you're setting out to accomplish. You have to go out there and find capital to go do that, which means finding investors who want to support you. And like the only way you're going to do that is by telling an exceptionally good story. Another way you could do that is by having exceptionally good data, but at the early stages, like we seldom have that. So you need to be exceptional storytellers. And I'm sometimes shocked how little we practice that. Like stand in the mirror and practice the thing over and over and over again. You should be able to sit in a room and be surrounded by some of the most intimidating people in the world. Start your pitch, black out, come to it at the end of it, and do a terrific job. That's kind of how rote the thing should be and how well rehearsed the thing should be. And sometimes we approach these things pretty lackadaisically. We're like, oh, we won't put up a slide presentation. We'll just talk about the thing and have a conversation. Be a good storyteller. Like that is the thing that I think matters most. And I think people discount that way too much.
I mean, I would agree.
Yeah. By the way, Dorothy and I know each other because during GroupMe, we worked with a firm called Brew PR to manage all of our communications, and Dorothy ran all of our comms. And that was a critical piece of getting the GroupMe story out there. So we go way back. And GroupMe, I mean, Dorothy really helped us hone and refine our story. So yeah, I guess I learned this from you. Thank you.
No, but you were, again, precociously good at it from the start, which is part of the reason we wanted to work with you and knew that you would be successful. Because it is an important part of being a founder, is being able to tell your story. And sometimes people can learn that and get better at it. But when you're good at it from the start, you're at a big advantage. Excuse me.
It is learnable. It is so learnable. And I think people might go into it feeling like, I'm not an extrovert. I'm sitting up here and I'm like talking like I'm an extrovert. I'm not. Like, I find it like it's draining. It's emotionally draining. It's, physically draining. I love doing it. Don't get me wrong, but like, it's draining. I'm not an extrovert. You can do this. You can sit there. You can hone this skill. You just practice over and over and over again. And it's that important. It's that important. Oh, the other thing I would say is people ask for money these days, and like the amount of money that they ask for is somewhat hand wavy. It's like, well, the seed market is this, therefore I want that amount of money, or Series A market is this, therefore I want that amount of money. That drives me fucking bananas. It's like, no, you're asking for capital. What do you want to do with the capital? You should have a plan for how you want to deploy it. You should have a plan for who you want to hire, what you want to ship, what you want to learn. Like that learning agenda is so critically important as well. And I don't like the whole like nebulous answer of, well, you know what, $12 million, because that's what the market says right now.
I'm going to start taking questions from the audience in a moment or two. So if you have them, I don't know, practice them in your head. But one last question for you. What's the best way for people here to develop a relationship with you or start to pitch you? What should they do if they want to pitch you?
You can just shoot me an email. I'm jared@usb.com. That's probably the easiest way. That is the easiest way. Do that. Or we can talk after this.
Should they do that when they are raising, before they're raising?
Yeah. Well, listen, I think the dream scenario as an investor is you've developed a relationship with an entrepreneur over a long period of time before they're even thinking about raising capital, such that when they do say, hey, I'm thinking about raising capital, you already know the person, you love the person, you're intimately familiar with it, with what it is that they're building. You've made the decision in your head to do the thing before they even want to raise money. That is the ideal scenario. So I'm very much a fan of building relationships with investors way, way, way before you actually might need the capital. Now, the thing that sucks about that is you want to spend all of your time building your business. So the way I kind of think about it is just try to identify who you think are like the 3 or 4 investors who might be interested in the thing you're building and that you think are uniquely qualified to actually partner with you and help you accomplish the things that you want to accomplish, and let them know what you're building, and try and maybe meet with them once a quarter, once every 4 months. Doesn't have to be like an every 2 weeks kind of thing. You don't have to send them updates every month. Just enough so that you're top of mind and you are nurturing a relationship over time. I wouldn't do it with like 20 different investors. I would try to pinpoint who you think is really special.
And everybody should email you now. Might as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do it. Okay, we're going to switch over now to taking questions from y'all. I'd recommend, if you have a question, to make sure it's one that is not just, your way of pitching yourself or asking a question that only you care about. If you have one that you think more people are interested in hearing the answer to, that's exactly what I want to hear. Okay. Hands up. Oh, my front row. They're the A+ students. Okay, let's start with James. I saw your hand first. You can just speak up loudly.
All right, question for you around conviction. Yeah. So you felt conviction to build your first startup improvement, then you went on to the second one. Your story, you said maybe 7 years in, talk to your leadership team, maybe you didn't have the conviction to keep going. But with the pandemic and all of those things. As a first-time founder, probably like a lot of my peers here, how do you analyze or understand in your head what is, hey, I have conviction and I'm just hitting some endings here. I need to keep pushing forward and be resilient and gritty and all the other things, or hey, maybe it's time to call it. What advice would you give the founders who may be in a situation like that, or how would you?
I'm going to repeat the question, or I may rephrase it a little bit, but basically, how do you decide or know whether you're hitting a wall and it's time to call it quits versus you're facing headwinds and you have to gear up and keep going?
So I think the most important thing to understand is that there are approximately 0 people out there who will put as much pressure on you as you will yourself. For investors, you are part of a portfolio. You're one of many investments. And yeah, while they want everybody to be wildly successful, like it's kind of baked into the business model that there are going to be some companies that don't. That's just the nature of venture. But as an entrepreneur, this is your lifeblood. It's your identity. It's the thing that you say you do. It's who you are. It's how you introduce yourself to friends, family at a party. Again, it sounds so cheesy, but part of this is just being honest with yourself and knowing that it's okay to kind of like lift your thumb up a little bit and apply a little bit less pressure. And if you're not in it, you're not in it. And there's really no way to fake it. And the times where people get really, really depressed as entrepreneurs and really sad and start not liking what they're doing are particularly during these times where they have no drive and no motivation. And I think when you're reflecting on it, it's important to understand if that's because of something external that's happening in the world. Maybe it's some personal event, maybe it's something else that's impacted your motivation, or if it's something that's deeply embedded in the thing you're doing. So my example here is that with GroupMe, I was in love with our mission. We felt that social media was making communications extremely sterile because we were broadcasting everything to the world and we couldn't be ourselves. And in these private groups, we could joke, we could tell terrible jokes, we could say things, privately amongst each other. We could just be ourselves. And we loved that. And that kept us going for 3 years. But I think it would have kept us going for 30 years if we really needed to. With Fundera, wasn't obsessed with the mission. I wanted to learn. I wanted to build a real business. I wanted to prove to the world all these things. And early on, I kind of convinced myself that I was obsessed with the mission. Made for a good story. But it's not like I woke up in the middle of the night thinking about, damn it, I love small business loans. No, that just wasn't a thing. I love the idea of helping entrepreneurs and small business owners thrive and achieve their dreams, but I wasn't obsessed with the mission of the company. And by year 7, by year 8, I realized that. And I think it took a real honest kind of reflection with myself to say, like, the fire really, the long-term fire comes from a maniacal obsession with solving the problem and reaching kind of that happy end state of the mission. That's where you see entrepreneurs stay with their company for their entire lifetime. And I don't think I'm that kind of person. Like, I don't think I have that in me. And I think it's okay to admit to yourself that you may not be that kind of person. Doesn't mean you're not an entrepreneur. It doesn't mean you're not a great entrepreneur. It just means that that's who you are. And that's perfectly fine. But I think you got to be honest with yourself. And I think you got to say, am I still obsessed with this mission? Yes or no? Yeah.
Very different. I love that you mentioned conquering search was a big part of Fundera's initial success. And so kind of in the era of AI search, when results are, it's more like giving you answers rather than 10 blue links. How do you see, or how would you think about this? Like, for founders thinking about search, thinking about what used to be a very easily understandable, quote unquote, way to acquire customers. How are $1 billion question? How are you as a fund? How are you as a founder thinking about this?
How long do you have? I mean, this is.
It's sit here for hours.
Yeah. So
Let's I'm not even sure how to rephrase this question.
What's the future of search?
Future search, yeah.
Is SEO still a
In
thing?
the age of AI.
Through the lens of founder, I suppose.
Yeah. So, okay. Okay. If we can frame it like that. If you are a founder and you are thinking about SEO as a customer acquisition channel, which I think is the lens that you're orienting around here, how should you think about that? Well, I think it would be prudent to assume that it won't be as effective of a channel as it once was. And there's a reasonable chance that over the course of the next 10 years, I don't want to say it goes away entirely, but it's a significantly less effective one than it is today. So if you're like, SEO is going to be the way that I'm going to acquire all my customers and I'm banking on it, I'd say you should rethink that, because we might be moving very rapidly to a world of answer engines. We might be moving to a world where publishers' content is abstracted away from these answer engines, and it's getting to be a very, very thorny topic. I think it's one of the most fun things to think about, period. Obviously, we don't know the answers. We look to entrepreneurs to come to us with what they think the answers might be. I think it's one of the most fascinating things that's happening on the internet in the world right now. But I would say be very, very careful if SEO is a core part of your customer acquisition strategy and you're starting right now. I'm so curious to see what established companies do right now who are like publicly traded companies or very, very large companies that rely primarily or exclusively on SEO. I presume they are freaking out to an extent. I don't know the degree to which they are, but wow, what an exciting time.
Are you happy that Fundera is no longer, you don't need to tackle this issue anymore?
I'm very happy I'm here.
Kyle, you have a question.
Thanks for sharing your story on GroupMe. Your founder story reminds me a lot of my own, where I turned to somebody who was very technical to build a product for me. And a cliche is that funds will often say we invest in founders. Is the non-technical founder and founder relationship something that you have very, like, you know, this is great, this doesn't matter, there's some bad stuff here, anything you have to say?
So what do you think about the co-founder relationship between a technical and non-technical founders?
Like, what do I think about it in general?
Is it advantageous? Is it something that funds care about, don't care about? Do you have an opinion that matters?
Well, I'm a non-technical co-founder, so I like to think that it's okay to be non-technical. So are you. It's okay. I think it is meaningfully more advantageous to be technical, to be able to build things on your own. Kind of going back to this thing around, like, do you have to ask for permission or not? If you're not technical, you're kind of asking for permission. You're relying on some gatekeeper or somebody else. I think, if you're non-technical, and you should absolutely have a technical co-founder. I think it's really hard in an uphill battle if you don't, particularly because it's nearly impossible for you to call BS on anything. If you're not technical, you should become fluent as fast as you possibly can. You should be able to communicate with software engineers without them thinking you're a total moron. You should be able to do things like be a good product manager. Ideally, if you're a product manager, you're also somewhat technical. But listen, plenty of great companies have been built by non-technical founders and non-technical co-founders. I don't know, there's a million ways to talk about this. I think it's ultimately beneficial if you have a technical co-founder. Yeah, and have a great relationship with them, obviously.
No, you didn't have one though at Fundera.
No, I did.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I did.
I just don't know them.
No, it was Rohan, who was a consultant at GroupMe.
Oh.
Yeah, we tried to recruit him at GroupMe.
Yes.
So I attended a Founders Club of New York event a couple months ago, and it was an awesome keynote. The guy got acquired by ServiceNow. One of the things that he brought up was like the personal relationship challenges of a founder, and I just went through a breakup. I'm trying to understand, like, from a personal level, like, how has being a founder of two entities affected your interpersonal relationships, and how have they molded over time, especially over the darker parts of your journey?
Well, I'm sorry you just went through a breakup. It's a bummer. It does happen. Oh man. So the week after we got our first term sheet from GroupMe, I asked Carrie, whose idea GroupMe, who kind of came up with the GroupMe idea, to marry me. And then a week after we sold the company, we got married. And then we have 2 kids and we're still happily married. It's maintaining relationships when you're building a company is really, really difficult. And I am kind of the, here's something that's maybe a little bit contrarian, or you ask for like, what do I believe that, I think there's like a lot of kind of vibey stuff out there that's like, oh yeah, you can do all these things as a founder. You can have like a thriving, like, social life and date and get married and, be present with your kids and all these things. And no, you can't do all the things well. You just don't have time. You don't have energy. It's impossible. And you're also just in a crazy head state almost all the time too. So it's kind of like you got to pick and choose. By the way, let me preface this by saying that all of the advice that I'm giving right now is all through the lens of my own lived experience. I'm an N of 1. It might be totally irrelevant for you. It's just one of many data points that you should accumulate and pick up along the way. It's your job to make your decisions independently. So all the things that I'm saying might be totally irrelevant for you, but they were very relevant for me. So I'm going to keep talking about them. It's really difficult to maintain these relationships. I kind of am the mindset that, at least in my experience, a lot of my friendships kind of withered away when I was building companies. They just did. I did not have time to invest in them and to maintain them. I picked them up in between companies, but then once again, they all withered away when I was building these companies again. And I don't know, like in retrospect, how the hell I could have maintained them. I generally think it was impossible. The things that mattered to me most was my relationship with Carrie and maintaining that and making sure that that flourished and thrived over time, and my relationship with my children, both of whom I had while doing Fundera. So like that's kind of all that mattered. That's how I prioritized it for me. The other relationships that matter were the ones that I had inside the companies, the ones with my co-founders and the ones with our leadership teams and all of our employees. And that's kind of how I stack rank prioritize the relationships in my life. And I think you kind of just got to think about what's most important to me personally and professionally and make kind of those hard trade-offs. And God, that sounds terrible to be like, I'm not going to invest in these friendships that I've had for a long time. But like, good Lord, I went silent for years and that sucked. And I feel really shitty about that. I don't know another way around that. And God bless you if you can figure it out.
Hi, Jared, thank you for your talk.
Thanks.
There's a lot of talk around how it's been a tough funding environment, VCs, but I think founders too, founders I'm friends with anyways, have shared feedback just how some unrealistic expectations that VCs have gone to have. Every company needs to be a unicorn company. Some of these founders encounter health problems because they're pushed so much by VCs. So it's a bit of a turning back from founders around VCs. And maybe not everyone's experience. Of course, we all know your experience of building a startup, not everyone, it's very tough. What was your kind of take as a VC who was a founder as opposed to any alternative route? And what do you think maybe the future of the VC and founder relationship is when there's a little bit of tension that's come out, all the pressure, some realistic, some unrealistic? What is your thoughts about that?
Well, listen, I think, as if you spend all of your day, or if you go through periods of your time building a company where you spend a meaningful chunk of time pitching VCs, you kind of come to the conclusion that, God, I think a lot of VCs kind of suck. And you think that for a variety of reasons. A, you think that it's super offensive that they're not going to invest in your company, and they tell you all the reasons why they think it won't work. And B, what the hell do they know? A lot of times they haven't built a company. They've only talked to me for a short period of time. And C, well, you know what? They actually just might have sucked as an individual, as a person. And I'm an investor now. I still think all those things are true for what it's worth. But I think that there are exceptions to the rule. Obviously, everyone at USV is an exception to that rule. I mean that. Obviously, that's why I'm here. But I think that's the case more often than not. I think that the dynamics between entrepreneur and VC ebb and flow over time. There are some periods of time where capital is really scarce for entrepreneurs and the power dynamic shifts in favor of the VC. There are other times where capital is plentiful and founders can raise money, or at least we have the impression that people can raise money left and right. And, VCs have to fawn over and woo founders, and they'll invest in them at exorbitantly high valuations with absolutely crazy terms, which, by the way, not a good thing for entrepreneurs, almost 99.9% of the time. So, I don't know how else to answer this question other than like power dynamics vacillate over time. That's just the course of this whole industry. I don't think that's ever going to change. All this stuff is just a spectrum, and the pendulum swings from one end to the other end. And where we are right now is probably somewhere like the market got terrible for the past couple of years. Capital was scarce again. And now it's, gradually going from like the VC to the founder side. But that was after ZERP happened and like the pendulum was way over here in favor of the founder. And I use these words like in favor of, and I don't even like those words that are coming out of my mouth, but that's kind of just what it is. Like you experience it long enough and you realize that these things are somewhat cyclical. I do think the important thing here, though, is to work with people that are good people. I don't think there's any substitute for that whatsoever. I don't care if that person has more industry experience and, they're one of the, best investors in the world on a returns perspective. Like, dude, life's too short to work with people you just don't like. Work with good people.
Okay, we're going to take one last question.
I think you said when you joined GroupMe, Twilio was a big enabler for what the product ended up being, but also say on the flip side, it big drag $350,000.
Yeah.
When did you start to notice that the Twilio partnership was a problem? Can you talk about a little bit of the process of transitioning away from Twilio?
Yes.
And then if you were to be in a similar predicament of a third party could be an enabler, how would you assess making
I'll repeat the question. Yeah, sure. So the question was essentially, when did we built GroupMe on top of Twilio. Twilio was this new infrastructure that enabled GroupMe to actually exist in the first place, but costs grew really quickly. When did we think about moving off Twilio? When did we realize it was going to become a problem? And the last part of the question was, how would I assess a similar predicament? Well, I think that usually what happens is there's some form of an enabling technology like a Twilio, or in this instance, like in the day and age where we exist right now, like an OpenAI or any open source LLM that exists, where all of a sudden this piece of technology enables you to go build all these new types of applications that could have never existed before. And that's so incredibly exciting. And I think when that piece of technology emerges, it's like our collective job to go dream up all the cool shit that we can build, because that's how the future gets pulled forward. It's an extraordinary, exciting time. Now, the problem with that is that if the thing you're building ultimately ends up working, your costs start accelerating really rapidly. So like we see a lot of companies right now that have escalating variable costs if they're using a service like OpenAI, because they're paying more and more as more and more people start using their application. So it's kind of this thing where, oh my God, as the thing scales, the costs become seemingly unmanageable. And that's really difficult. So then you have to have a strategy as to how you're going to migrate off that expensive piece of infrastructure, which generally means getting closer and closer and closer to, in the GroupMe case, the metal, which is what we call the telco industry. In the instance of like, are you using Open API? You're probably not going to develop your own models, but maybe you're trying to figure out what are the other models that I should be using? What are the other open source LLMs that I should be using to drive down costs? How do I route the right query to the right model? All in the hopes of generally arbitraging costs so that you can actually manage them as you scale. in the instance of GroupMe, we were like 23, 24 years old, and we were like, oh my God, we're spending now $500,000 a month on SMS costs. We have to get off Twilio, which means we have to understand how the telco infrastructure actually works and cut deals directly with kind of this middleware layer that Twilio was built on top of, which was just a very awkward position to be in at that point in time, where we're like, yeah, we'll cut a multi-million-dollar, multi-year contract with you for unlimited SMS. Deals like that hadn't been cut before. So we had to kind of go out there and find like expert consultants to help navigate us through that whole thing. So that process was weird. It was like, dude, we build a group chat app. I don't give a shit about telco infrastructure, but like we had to become experts on it real fast. And I don't know, it's kind of just one of those instances where you just got to do what you got to do and fake it until you make it and like try and pull a rabbit out of a hat. And that's what we did. We worked for like 3 months nonstop trying to cut a deal with this company called Bandwidth. That was a company that Twilio used, and we had to circumvent them. One thing we did try to do, which is something we see right now a lot, we see a version of this a lot. We approached Jeff Lawson, who is the founder of Twilio, which is also a USV-backed company, and said, hey, we're kind of like the first breakout consumer application that was built on top of Twilio. Why don't we do an equity swap? Why don't you give us give us messaging at cost, and in return, we'll give you some equity in GroupMe, and we'll get some equity from Twilio, and like our incentives will be totally aligned. Let's go do this. And they kind of just were like, ha ha ha, that's cute. Go away. And that would have been an amazing deal for GroupMe. Probably not so much for Twilio, but it was worth a shot. And we kind of see an equivalent of that right now, right? With like these big kind of closed source models trying to make investments in the applications that are built on top of them. You see this two ways. You see people who are supplying compute to these open source to like OpenAI, making an investment in OpenAI, which is kind of just this weird accounting mechanism where they're actually just essentially giving them compute for equity and then booking it as revenue. And it's this very convoluted accounting system, and it's unclear how the market will reward that. So what, if it's legal or not, who knows? But you also see this thing at the LLM layer where they're making investments in applications that sit on top of them and use them, all in an effort to help the ecosystem flourish, grow faster, and entrench their products deeper and deeper and deeper over time. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Jared. Thank you to the whole USV platform team. Thank you to Haley, who's the top product design student at NYU, by the way, if you need an intern this summer. Thanks for helping out today. There's food and drinks in the reception area, and Jared's also going to hang around for the next hour or so. So get up, stretch your legs, meet somebody new, make a new best friend. Thank you for coming.